I'll open our meeting. Welcome everyone, and advise everyone that the audio and video of this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to the community via the City of Hobart's YouTube channel. If there is any elected member who has not yet signed into the meeting in accordance with the COVID Safe Plan, please do so now. And I'll request that all mobile phones be turned off or put to silent. We have all elected members present except Councillor Ewan, who's an apology.
Correct.
And we have no leave of absences at this stage. So to start with, in recognition of the deep history and culture of this place, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which the City of Hobart was built. I acknowledge the determination and resilience of the Palawa people of Tasmania, who have survived invasion and dispossession and continue to maintain their identity, culture and rights. Okay, we have minutes from our meeting 27th of January, moved by Deputy Lord Mayor, seconded by Councillor Dutta. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried unanimously. Transfer of any agenda items, there's only a couple, so I'm sure everyone's happy. I have no communications this week. Council workshops, there haven't been any since our last meeting. Public question time?
No, Lord Mayor.
We have none. And petitions?
No, Lord Mayor.
We have none.
No.
Okay, and there's no supplementary items. Item 8 is indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. Do any elected members wish to indicate an interest in any item appearing on the open agenda? There being none, we will now move on to the City Planning Committee, and I will note that the Council is now acting as a planning authority. I'll invite Deputy Lord Mayor to introduce item 9.1.
9.1, Lord Mayor, is 53 Collins Street, Hobart and Common Land of Parent Title, change of use to visitor accommodation. We have a motion, or it came to committee without a motion. Can I move for refusal? Yes, okay, so I'll move that this item be refused based on conditions which have already been discussed at the committee meeting. Lord Mayor, this is one of a number of visitor accommodations that have come to us at 1 Collins Street. So, and I remember last time we considered visitor accommodation in this residential facility. It was quite aggressively argued that we should accept the visitor accommodation. This time the applicant has requested that his house or his apartment at 1 Collins Street, be made into visitor accommodation. He's suggesting that he's a fly-in, fly-out worker and is not in Tasmania all of the time and wants to lease out his house while he's not there. That may all be very well, but there are a number of representors who are somewhat concerned about the application and the extent of impact on residential amenity, on security, and how that might change the toing and froing that occurs for people coming in and out who may not be resident, who may not have the same values, who may be on holidays and may treat this rather than a house or a home. They're treating it more as a place to visit and sometimes to party, whatever. So there are so many things to consider in this. Unfortunately, it's an interesting sort of body corporate situation. So there are two processes occurring with applications for visitor accommodation in this kind of townhouse residential apartments, and it's unfortunate that the body corporate has not, according to emails and personal contact I've had with some of the representors, some of the body corporate messages of complaints haven't got through to the council in relation to other visitor accommodation. So I don't know, I often when I'm looking at applications that come before us, I consider whether, you know, how would I like it if I were living possibly next to one visitor accommodation, possibly two, because we've got another one right next door to this, how that might impact on my amenity if I were living there. And I would be concerned. A lot of the residents are older in this residential apartment block, and their security, their peace of mind, their residential amenity does need to be reflected well, and my concern is that this is being eroded by this application. So hence the move for refusal.
Alderman Briscoe?
Has there been a second to that motion?
No, there hasn't. Councillor Dutta.
Okay, look, I accept on one level what the Deputy has just said, but our officers have assessed this against the planning scheme, and the recommendation to the committee was for approval. And I understand the fears of some of the residents. There are 37 other residents on this site, I believe. The applicant who spoke to the first planning meeting that we had a week ago indicated he was a fly-in, fly-out worker. 4 days fortnight he would be residing here. He wants to travel back to Tasmania because he's got a 6-year-old daughter, and he wants to make sure he maintains that relationship. He indicated, and I imagine anyone who's fairly young by the look of him, had a huge mortgage, so he wants to maintain. Now, I know, Lord Mayor, it may not be a concern to you and I who live in quite nice houses, but if you've got your family split and you want a place in Hobart where you get a bit of income, and it won't be 100% occupied because the nature of these beasts is that because it's could be possibly a high-end short-term accommodation, it won't be 100% booked out. But for 4 days a year, 4 days a fortnight, then it will be occupied by the applicant. Now, I tried in committee, which I thought the committee might see a compromise rather than be one or the other, by suggesting it could be tied to the applicant. There seems to be no legal barrier to that, because there are a few cases where it indicated that if a particular applicant has particular attributes, and one case that was indicated in the memo to us was the Anglicare. The application for a boarding house was tied just to Anglicare because of their special attributes in running such a facility. So in this case, the amendment suggested was that it would be for 2 years tied to the applicant and reviewed at the end of 2 years, and then there would have to be another application. Now, during those 2 years, if there are any complaints, we would consider those. Maybe then we'd have evidence to support the assertions that it would affect unreasonably the neighbours or the other residents. So I'm foreshadowing a motion for approval with the officer's conditions that were suggested, plus an extra condition that's tied to the applicant for 2 years, and also the conditions that address some of the residents' concerns that were suggested at the previous planning meeting. Now, the planning scheme allows this. The officers, the professional officers have assessed it and said yes, and by adding an extra condition that I've suggested, provides a little bit more protection, knowing that if at the end of 2 years, we find there's heaps of complaints that he wasn't residing there for 4 days a fortnight, or very rarely residing there, then I think that's a different matter. And some of us might still be around the table in 4 years' time, and I'm sure the officers would have a corporate memory to remind us of that. And there'll obviously be an audio record of this meeting today. So I'll be voting against the motion for refusal, and as I said, I foreshadow motion of approval.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Lord Mayor, I'll be supporting the motion for refusal, and I've only got a couple of things to say. The first thing is that I see this is the steady erosion, as the Deputy Lord Mayor has mentioned already, the steady erosion of the residential nature of this residential complex. Already we have 5 units, or this will be the 5th unit, that will become short stay accommodation. There's 65 units, one's commercial already, and 5 with this one means that 8% of the premises will be short stay accommodation. And in the report at page 9, paragraph 6.7.8, 65 lots on the strata title. Of these lots, 1 is commercial, 4 visitor lots, and the remainder are residential. Given the breakdown, the uses on the parent site, it's considered that the overall scale of visitor accommodation use of the site respects the residential character and use of the site. Well, I disagree with that comment. And I also would like to know what the line is. At what point do we say that's enough? Is it 50%? Is it 10%? And as we've heard earlier, there's already applications for more short stay accommodation in this block of units. So at what point, and I don't understand when, do we just keep saying, well, yes, you know, it's mixed use is okay, but there's got to be a point where we say, well, this is not a hotel, this is a block of residential units. So I think the ceiling's been reached already. And the second point I'd like to make is that there has been complaints about the existing short stay accommodation on the site. Unfortunately, they didn't come to council. They went to the body corporate and they weren't forwarded to council, so we're not quite sure what those complaints are. And I think it's important that we do have a mechanism where we do receive the complaints so we can monitor the impacts of short stay accommodation. So I'll be supporting the recommendation for refusal because I think there's enough short stay accommodation in this block, and it does have a detrimental effect on the residents who live there permanently. Even though they might be renting, they're still permanent residents of the site. So I'm very happy to be supporting the Lord Mayor's recommendation for refusal. And we already have some words as per the committee meeting that can be used to support that recommendation for refusal.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions for the moment, Lord Mayor, in regards to the matter of the 200 square metres. Is the deck, through you to the appropriate officer, is the deck on this particular property included in the total overall area of the development, the DA?
Mr. Noy.
Through you, Lord Mayor, look, I would assume that it's floor area, not necessarily external floor area. So floor area would involve enclosed walls, so I don't think the deck would be included.
Yeah, okay. I'll just sit down for the moment.
Sorry, Mr. Noy, sorry, is that a private deck or is it a common deck?
Private deck.
I assumed it was referring to a private deck, but the 200 square metres is exceeded already for this title, so it's not material in the assessment process.
I think it was Alderman Baracus.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Just a question first. In regards to the complaints made to the body corporate, through you to the director, in regards to the complaints that have been referred to that have made to the body corporate, do we have any understanding about the nature of those complaints? Is it, you know, are they complaints that were relevant to the body corporate and not necessarily relevant to council enforcement, or was there a reason why they haven't come to us?
No, we're not aware of the nature of the complaints on this instance.
Thank you. Look, I think there's a few points to make here that are important. First of all, and look at in fairness, it wasn't a huge topic of discussion, but it tends to be a topic of discussion whenever short stay comes up. This isn't one of those situations where a house is being taken off the housing market or the rental market. As was said, it's a fly-in, fly-out worker. The applicant intends on living there for the bulk of the year, and just wants the ability to use it or utilise it when he's away. As well, look, in regards to the complaints, I think we need to be careful. I think we need some understanding of what the complaints are. Otherwise, and it was said in committee last week, I'll never fault anyone for exercising their discretions and making a decision that runs contrary to the officers if there's a good justification for it. But I think when we do so, there needs to be a good justification for it. And I think we need to be careful not doing that based on speculation. The council has not received any complaints. We've heard that there have been some complaints, but as was said, are they complaints in excess of what gets made in private rentals? Where people misbehave in long-term rentals, and there's as to the addition of another short stay into the building. I know. Look, I appreciate what Councillor Harvey said, where do we draw the line? And perhaps that's a good question to ask, and there needs to be some sort of precedence or some sort of guidance as to what constitutes a material distancing from or a material change in the fabric or the style of an area. But I think 5 out of 65 dwellings in the area is just a touch over 7%. I'm not sure if that would constitute a dramatic or a substantial impact or substantial change to the overall complex, I suppose is the word. And in regards to this being, and it was referred to in the committee about the planning directives. It does say, and it was one of the issues, that the short stay accommodation must not be located on the same site as a dwelling providing long-term residential accommodation unless it has a separate ground level pedestrian access to a road or there's an existing mix of uses on the site. And that all is important because it means that, look, because there are existing short stay, meaning a mix, this is permitted. My understanding, like as far as I take it, this is something that is ultimately compliant with the planning scheme. It's compliant with the rules. We do have motions that the council is investigating regarding short stay accommodation, but they don't apply to this in this instance. I think we need to be careful applying the rules as the rules are, and I think we need to be careful if we're looking at exercising discretion. In this case, we need to be using some sort of hard facts and not relying on speculation that the suggestion that it might or it might not. That we've got nothing to show us that one more short stay accommodation in that complex is going to be any worse for the residents, or there's going to be any reduction in amenity separate to if this dwelling was put out to the private rental market and it was a tenant living there in long-term rental. I think we need to be careful in differentiating that. And so far, the council itself has not received any evidence to say that what the officers have said in their reports is inaccurate. So I think in this case, I'd be leaning towards supporting the recommendations of the officers. I'd be voting against the motion that we're currently discussing. I'd be supporting the foreshadowed motion by Alderman Briscoe, and I would ask Alderman Briscoe that he also include those amendments that were suggested. The other okay, awesome. Look, I'll be supporting the foreshadowed motion.
Alderman Zuko.
Yeah, I just have another question through you, the General Manager, to Mr. Noy. Just in regards to this, let's hypothetically say this matter gets approved tonight, or not approved. What would your thoughts be on what would happen at a tribunal if it wasn't approved? Sorry, Mr. Noy, but I always go down that track.
Mr. Noy.
Being consistent.
Well, I'm always guided by the qualified officer's advice, and they would suggest that if a refusal was appealed, then the appeal might be upheld under those circumstances.
Yeah, look, Lord Mayor, I think I always go down this track. What concerns me is the risk of us going down the track of refusing this and it goes to tribunal and then we go through another costly exercise, you know. I think we've got to stop this costly exercise practice. You know, the reality is, and I've said this before, we've got planners, they're here to give us advice. If we're going to constantly go against their advice, why don't we just sack the whole planning department? I've stated constantly in the public domain that this council and other councils should not be planners because none of us are experts in planning. We are experts in lobbying, we are experts in being lobbied, and we're experts on making decisions based on lobbying, not on officer advice. This has been going on quite a while. We constantly get back from the tribunal in closed council, mind you, for us to overturn the decision we made at council at the last meeting. And I've constantly in closed council actually made the point that this is not on and costly. I'm absolutely tired of it. I'm frustrated with it. I feel for those 11 people that have got their concerns, but this is not about who can lobby us the hardest, how many lobby us. This is about planning. It's about officer advice. And you know what? If we're serious about continually not taking officer advice, General Manager, just before you go, can you please sack the planning department? Because I think that's what we should be doing. We are constantly, as far as I'm concerned, also sending a message to our planning division that no matter what they write, no matter how advice they give, when it comes to elected members, we're going to just treat them as if they're non-existent. You know what? If I was a person working at this council at the moment, especially in the planning department, on the way that we treat our planning department, I'd be feeling a little bit dejected as well, and I'd be thinking about whether or not I want to continue working for this council. Sorry?
Can I ask you to stick to the matters about this planning matter, not sort of broader commentary around staff management issues? And we have an application in front of us. So
yeah, I'm talking about that. I'm talking about the mere factor that I have just witnessed in a planning committee meeting, Lord Mayor, a recommendation come to this council that says we approve this because of X, Y, Z, right? Not one member of this chamber is an expert in planning. I'm no expert in planning. But our experts out the back here who give us the advice that says approve, we have got a group of elected members who don't want to approve because they may have been lobbied. Look, I've been lobbied as well. But I have read the report. I am trying to understand the 200 square metre factor. There has been other applications approved here. Mr Noy has answered my question in the sense that if this matter went to tribunal, most likely the tribunal will uphold the decisions made by the planning department. So why are we going to force the issue to go to tribunal? I'm sorry, Lord Mayor. The points I'm making are very, very valid. If we don't want a planning department, let's sack them, or let us ensure that the state government takes planning away from councils, full stop.
Councillor Dutta.
Lord Mayor, through you, I have a question. In the past, when we have had expert advice, has there been times when that expert advice went to tribunal and it was overturned?
Mr Noy.
Yes, through you, Lord Mayor, there has been instances where officers' decisions have not been upheld in the tribunal.
Further discussion?
Thank you.
Councillor Coates.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Look, in terms of the motion in front of us, as put, I'll be voting against the refusal and I'll be supporting the foreshadowed motion. Look, I think, yet again, this example where the committee systems work well, we had a very, very thorough investigation, analysis and discussion in regards to this application. A lot of it went down the path that was just described, where we tested the officers. We said, well, you know, is this legal? We looked at the floor space. We looked at the, what discretion we do have in this area. And look, ultimately the committee couldn't come to a decision and brought it forward as with the officers' original recommendations. But As part of it, I think there were a few bits of information that came to light where, in this instance, ultimately the planning scheme didn't rule it out. It is within our discretion, and we did hear that, in this instance at least, we do have an applicant who, through personal circumstances, not necessarily any fault of their own, they're actually doing the right thing here. I mean, I know it was some irony, but if they would just put a lock on one of the rooms in their unit and say they live there the whole time, even though they're working in Victoria and only back in Tassie 4 days a week, they wouldn't need to even apply for a change of use because it would be their residence, and they would be able to rent out the other rooms and have people coming and going, and it wouldn't even come before us. But, I think they've actually done the right thing. We heard from the applicant that it's going to be professionally managed. They were more than agreeable to have points of contact for other people in the residences. The one sticking point that we were waiting to come back on was to hear if any formal complaints had been received by council. I think council officers, to their credit, have actually done the work. They've reviewed and said, look, we haven't. They then contacted the body corporate and went above and beyond and found out body corporate has actually dealt within this complex. Now, it's a complex of 65 units. I'd be amazed if they're not dealing with an issue every week, to be frank. The fact that not one of those has either not been able to be resolved at that level and had the person's then taken it up to us at the council, to me indicates that what is actually happening in that building is working well. And look, ultimately I think with a lot of these, the discussion needs to be happening before we see the individual application. If the rules allow short-term accommodation, then the rules allow short-term accommodation. In this instance, I can't see a reason to knock it back. I agree with Mr Noy, which is even if we were to, we'd probably lose an appeal and that would come at ratepayer expense. And in this instance, speaking to our discretion, we actually have a genuine reason as to why in this circumstance this person is going down this path. And I think they're doing the right thing. I would hope in a year's time to be able to get a job back in Hobart and be living there permanently. And this would be a moot point. But I think the foreshadowed motion that we discussed in the committee is a good one. We do set up conditions as we're able to provide the comfort for the existing residents who have raised legitimate fears. But look, when it came down to the balance of it, I sat there and looked at what does the planning scheme allow. I agreed with the officer's recommendations. And then I sat and I go, well, is there a strong reason why we might use our discretion to knock this back? And I couldn't find one, but I could find valid reasons as to why in this instance I think the applicant's doing the right thing. And I think we should be voting in support of the foreshadowed motion. And so look, I'll be voting against the refusal, and I'll urge others to do so as well. Thank you.
Councillor Dutta.
Lord Mayor, I want to very plainly and categorically refer to the planning scheme. Firstly, let me state the facts and then present two issues. The facts, as I understand it, are these. There are 65 units or 65 lots. There is the tower, which has 45, and then the two wings, and each wing has 10 units. Each of those two wings have separate access. In the tower, they don't have a separate access. There is a common access. There are two elevators. Hence, the issue of concern. Furthermore, the facts, as I read it, as it's been presented to us, also states very clearly that on this particular level, I think it is level 4, there is the application before us is 53, and we've been told earlier on in the City Planning Committee meeting that there are 2 others in the pipeline that's coming through. So on that particular level, which has 8 units on a level, you'll have 2 of these, if it's approved, change to visitor accommodation. Now, so for me, the issue is this. Issue number 1, whether the application before us satisfies the provisions of clause 3.3d. That is the issue for me. And the clear facts here before me states quite clearly that these clauses, in fact, particular clause allows for 200 square meters, and it has exceeded that. Therefore, it does not comply with the provisions. It doesn't satisfy it. That's the issue. And that's a planning scheme. It's not my view, it's not my opinion, it's looking at the facts as they are. Hence, we take this application and put it under the performance criteria as we've been told, and let me do it. The performance criteria, clause 3.3e, states this. It provides, in this particular clause, it provides that the visitor accommodation criteria 2 or element 2 states not likely to cause an unreasonable increase in noise. That is what the planning scheme is saying. Not to cause an unlikely increase in noise. Now the staff report, if you look at it, attachment A, page 18, states this, 6.7.7, and I read, it recognizes that some guests may use visitor accommodation in a manner that generates unreasonable noise. So here we have a report that states quite clearly that there may be guests who will in fact generate unreasonable noise. It's an acknowledgement, it's an acceptance of the fact. However, argument is presented.
Can I just say I couldn't quite catch the whole sentence there?
On page 18, you will find that the report recognizes that the some guest may use visitor accommodation in a manner that generates unreasonable noise.
Is that the full sentence?
No. Let me, I haven't finished. I haven't finished. And then it goes on to say, to justify that if you compare this with a permanent resident and a visitor who comes in for a day or two and goes away, that noise would be the same. That's what the point they're making. So either you have a permanent resident or someone on a short day, the noise will be the same. Realistically, it is not going to be the same. The behavioral patterns of those who come for a day or 2 days is very different from those who live there permanently on a long term.
30 seconds.
Anecdotal evidence proves that, and research evidence also proves that quite clearly. Therefore, my point here is, the question is whether this increase in the noise can be deemed to be unreasonable. Remember, the point here is very clear. It is not the unreasonable noise, but the cause of the unreasonable noise. What are the factors that can cause? May I seek an extension of a minute, please?
Moved by Deputy Lord Mayor, seconded by Councillor Harvey for 1 minute. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously.
Thank you. So the causes of this unreasonable noise can be a number of factors. One, you would have these visitors coming in there, going to catch the plane at 6 in the morning and bang the door. You'd have a lot more people doing that. That's only one cause that will cause the increase of noise. I personally went there today, went inside the building, went in the unit and checked out those units. And I was convinced when I shut the door, I could hear it. And therefore, for me, the evidence provided by the residents, the verbal evidence, and the experiential evidence is much more convincing to me than the evidence which hasn't been provided by the staff.
15 seconds now.
Therefore, on the basis of this, I would say that noise can be measured by decibels. There is no evidence that that noise had been measured. This, in fact, noise can affect different people in different ways, and therefore the sensitivities of this need to be taken. Thank you.
That's time. Thank you. Alderman.
Yeah, Lord Mayor, through you to the Director. Director, all the points raised by Alderman Dutta, were they taken into consideration in writing the report?
Mr. Noy.
Through you, Lord Mayor, yes, they were.
Thank you very much.
A question.
Councillor Dutta.
The question is, when these reports are presented to us, is there also an understanding by the staff that there will be alternative interpretation given? Would that be true?
yes.
Thank you.
Further discussion?
Keep this going.
Okay, I do have a few comments to make. Just a question actually for Mr Noy. Existing use rights with visitor accommodation, once you get a permit under the state government's visitor accommodation laws, I presume you've kind of got it for life. Is that correct?
No.
Well, you've got 2 years in which to act on the permit unless you seek a further extension, and you can extend out to 6 years before acting on that permit. But once you've acted on the permit, you've got existing use rights unless you cease the use for a period of 2 years.
Right. So it's quite a big decision, and every time we make a decision to remove visitor accommodation from the rental market, it is something that will last pretty much forever. Look, I just want to, I think Councillor Dudder summed up all of my planning comments very succinctly. The state government introduced some of the nation's most deregulated visitor accommodation rules a couple of years ago. However, there were a couple of exceptions to that. One is Battery Point and one is Wapping. And they did that for a reason, because they were encouraging us as a planning authority to consider those areas differently. And there are different rules for Wapping. And we must not just see this as approving visitor accommodation as though it's just in any part of Hobart, because there is a much higher bar. And what I've seen is, even though the bar says, well, you know, not more than, you can't have it if it's more than 200 metres squared, we've let them jump over that bar. You're not allowed to do it if there's not a separate entrance. If it's residential, we've let them jump over that bar. Then there's the, basically it says that in, you know, it is discretionary in Wapping, and the state government have done that because it's their view that these inner city Hobart suburbs very close to the city are vulnerable to being changed from residential to largely tourism, and they responded to the community by setting up some separate rules. So this is a different area. The rules are a lot stricter, and I'm not sure I agree with Alderman Zuko that this would be a lay down misere in the tribunal, because I think the
Point of clarification, Lord Mayor. I didn't make that assumption. I asked the question. I was actually advised that most likely, so it wasn't me, Lord Mayor. Thank you. I'd
possibly disagree with both Alderman Zuko and Mr Noy's assessment that this would be a certainty in the tribunal, because these rules around the Wapping area.
Point of clarification, Lord Mayor. I didn't make the assumption that it'd be a point of fait accompli in the tribunal at all whatsoever.
The rules state very clearly that you should not. The acceptable solution is that in a strata scheme, visitor accommodation is not suitable. It's not an acceptable solution if there's also residential use in the building. So that's the acceptable solution. And then there's also the performance criteria of this not causing unreasonable loss of residential amenity, which I think Councillor Dudder explained quite clearly. What concerns me is that must not cause unreasonable loss of amenity, residential amenity. To me, I believe that the onus of proof needs to be on the applicant to demonstrate how they are not going to be causing unreasonable loss of amenity, and I don't believe that has been provided. I also, unfortunately, do not feel that the staff have provided us with enough information about what process they have gone through to determine what substantive information or evidence they've collected to show that this will not cause an unreasonable loss of residential amenity. And I think when it comes to Wapping and the rules around Wapping, and to a certain extent Battery Point, we probably need some criteria for the planning staff because this is a fairly new area of law, and we need to be able to show how we have actually reached out and been absolutely sure through a series of steps that this won't cause unreasonable amenity, because as I said, the bar in Wapping is quite high compared to other parts of Hobart. So for all of those reasons, I believe that on planning grounds, there's a very strong reason that we need to, I'll go with the motion that's been moved. Thank you.
Point of clarification, Lord Mayor. I I don't want you and the council to believe that that my alternate motion is forever, because my alternate motion was a condition that was tied to the applicant for 2 years, and that therefore the permit would stop after 2 years unless there was another application and we'd go through it. So the idea that this would be a permanent transfer is misleading.
Yes.
And could you just accept that that's correct?
No, Alderman Briscoe, I won't, because the advice from the staff is uncertain, and my reading of the state legislation is such that if you've got a visitor accommodation permit and you act on it in the first 2 years, it is something that lasts forever. And I'm not sure we can override that.
Can I ask the Director then, because my understanding, if we say it's for 2 years, it's for 2 years. Would that be correct, Director Noy?
Through you, Lord Mayor, that is correct.
Thank you. So it's very clear that the planning director here has indicated that it's not forever. In this case, I'm talking about my foreshadowed motion.
So, sorry, but Mr. Noy, that does seem to contradict your earlier advice that I just asked you about existing use rights, that if you use your visitor accommodation permit within 2 years, you have it forever.
Yeah, there was a slight difference between my answer to your question and clearly my response to Alderman Briscoe. Alderman Briscoe's question related to the fact that it was limited in time. There's a condition proposed that it be limited in time, and under those circumstances it would be limited in time to 2 years, assuming that that's the time limit placed on the condition. So you don't get to extend beyond that 2 year period under those circumstances.
Okay. All right, so would you like to sum up?
Yes, but if I may, if you wouldn't mind, Lord Mayor, I'd just like to ask a question of Mr. Noy, who's doing a lot of running around, getting a bit of aerobic exercise. But Mr. Noy, did we not receive advice in a memo to suggest that I'll read the summary. The imposition of a condition restricting a permit to a particular person is open to challenge unless the restriction is imposed to address a proper planning consideration, etc. Did we not receive that advice?
Through you, Lord Mayor, that is correct. We did circulate a memo to that effect.
Okay, thank you.
So, yes, it could be
so
challenged.
we did, even though that wasn't part of the report, that certainly was a part of the advice to suggest that it wouldn't hold water necessarily.
Can I clarify, because this question was asked, a point of clarification, because it is a misleading one, like similar to what you did. It's misleading.
I'm not sure you can say it's misleading.
It's very similar, in my view, that just taking one comment from the end of the report. So, Director, is there circumstances where you can tie an application to a particular applicant? For example, the case that involved Anglicare a couple of years ago. There are circumstances, attributes, is that correct?
Yes, through you, Lord Mayor, that is correct.
Councillor, Deputy Lord Mayor.
Sorry,
Oh.
just a point of clarification. I just wanted to ask, so what was the ramifications of what Deputy Lord Mayor just read out to the Director's previous comment with regards to the condition? How does that impact in any way?
Yes, look, the issue relates to whether we can tie this permit specifically to the applicant. And as Alderman Briscoe pointed out, and as specified within the memo, there are certain particular circumstances where you can do that, and that relates often to the specific skill sets associated with the applicant. So that are inherently necessary to fulfil the terms of the application. The officer's view is that in this circumstances, this is not one of those circumstances. However, clearly there's an alternative view that there are some certain circumstances in that this person is a fly-in, fly-out applicant, and he will be occupying the property from time to time. So I think that's the two bases, arguments.
Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yes, in summary, Lord Mayor, I think there have been significant addition to this discussion, but the things that I might dispute, I don't believe that the foreshadowed motion as amended does stack up. It doesn't seem to really provide that residential amenity, which should be first and foremost in any development application in a multi-residential apartment block that we're looking at. So I just I can't fathom why that should be supported. We heard about complaints not getting through to council, but clearly from the information, whether it's lobbying or not, the information that's been provided by representatives for those of us who have made contact with them, it really is quite clear that there have been complaints from other situations. That doesn't mean that there will be complaints with this, but obviously the body corporate arrangements and getting those complaints through to council must be cleared up somehow for those residences. So it's really important that we do look at this. It is a discretionary application. That means that we could accept the officer's recommendation, but we don't have to. And I'm suggesting that we don't in this case, and we move on grounds for refusal.
Okay, so we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Against say no.
No.
Show of hands. All those in favour.
Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Sherlock, the Deputy Lord Mayor and the Lord Mayor.
Against?
Alderman Zuko, Alderman Sexton, Councillor Coates, Alderman Baracus, Alderman Thomas, Alderman Briscoe.
So it's lost, Lord Mayor, 5 votes to 6.
Okay, moving on now to item 10.
No, Lord
Oh,
Mayor.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, my foreshadow, are you calling me to...
Foreshadowed Alderman Briscoe.
Yes, I think probably either way it will be determined in the appeal tribunal, but to give it a shot that we are supporting the officer's recommendations for approval, modified by the council here tonight with the 2 amendments, one addressing some of the amenity issues that were brought up by the residents, and my amendment that we tie it to the applicant for 2 years, so it's a time, and then in those 2 years where the complaints come through to council, then when the application is considered again in 2 years' time, if the applicant's in the position he wants to continue, then we have real evidence. I think that is a win-win for the council. That's, not that I do have a faint hope that someone will change their mind through rational argument and consider all the aspects too. So, but either way, what will happen tonight if this goes down loses, or then the officer's recommendation will be the one that is considered as the one that the applicant has. So I think by doing that, allowing that to happen, we are not allowing the concerns of the residents to be put into the motion, into the permit. So I think that's the reason why. The concerns of the residents are put in the permit that's tied to the applicant for 2 years. So I think that's why, if I used to be able to use rational argument in the past, but I plead with someone, just give some certainty from this council.
Second, Lord Mayor.
Seconded by Alderman Baracus. Any discussion? Alderman Thomas?
I didn't speak before. I'll speak to the foreshadowed.
Oh, it will be the motion.
Oh, sorry, to the motion. I think it's a great slight that's been effected tonight to a whole range of very genuine visitors to our state, or to visitors anywhere in the world. For anybody who's lived next door to a permanent resident who leaves their music on all night, who in a case where they have pets making noises, who has visitors that come and stay and make a noise, I would love, and we can't do it tonight, I would love to get the mandated or the authoritative statistics that Councillor Dutta referred to, because I'm appalled that we would be sitting here opining on the social characteristics of people who come to visit in our city. Now, the other thing is, there's a set of conditions that have been put on tonight to this gentleman, and woe betide it if he doesn't comply. And I suggest that the conditions that we're imposing are going to be stronger than the conditions that I have living in my house right now. And I think we've got to be really bloody careful here, Lord Mayor, that we're not imposing Hobart for us, everyone else stay out, because we're putting mandated conditions. And I would love Councillor Dutta to receive over time your authoritative statements that visitors make more noise than a permanent resident. Thank you.
Councillor Dutta.
Just a question first, Lord Mayor, through you to the Director. The advice given to us with regards to tying the permit to a particular individual, is it risky to do that, as per the advice?
Mr. Noy.
Through you, Lord Mayor, as intimated within the memo, it could be challenged if that was the wish of any representative.
Sorry, while you're up, just on that point, Mr. Noy, is that related to visitor? The case you're talking about, that is related to visitor accommodation under the state government's provisions, is it? The other case you're talking about, the Anglicare case.
No, it's related to a different use than visitor accommodation. Yes.
So I guess the risk is that does the Visitor Accommodation Act override some of these other elements that you're?
Well, it's the officer's belief that those particular circumstances associated with the skill set of the applicant may not apply in this instance, and so there is potentially grounds for challenging that if there was a motivated representative. Now, as we've heard, I think there's been some suggestion that the representatives would be comfortable with such a condition. So it's only a risk if there are representatives or the applicant that weren't comfortable with that condition.
Okay. Any further discussion? Alderman Baracus.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I think I've said everything in regards to the the pros and cons of the application itself, but I think it's just interesting to note and reflect on. We're hearing from some of the same people or same members of council that were suggesting we were able to take and should be taking an alternative view from the guidance provided by the planning officers in one regard, but we shouldn't be taking an alternative view from the planning officers as to the nature of the 2-year time limit on the condition. So I hope that we're not cherry picking which advice is guidance and which advice we should be taking as gospel based on whether or not it agrees with our interest in this.
Lord Mayor, I just want to respond to the statements made. Firstly, with regards to the alternatives given, the point of the question was to emphatically and categorically make us realize that there are times when we individually or collectively sometimes go against the decision of the staff, and sometimes we support them. That's the very point I was making. And it's not just, we all the time go against the staff recommendation. The other point with regards to this is the condition that it is attached, the permit is going to be attached to a particular person, for me, is risky, and therefore I will not be supporting this. Thank you.
I'll put the... would you like to
Thank
sum up?
you. Yes, just very briefly. Reading the memo, attributes and particular circumstances of the applicant, the 2 cases that were quoted indicate it is possible to do it. The risk is not a big risk. What's the risk? What's the risk? That we could get back the ability to tie an application to an applicant. And over the years I've been here, we've had that ability to tie, and it worked. It worked, enabled business to thrive, residents to do things. Somehow it's crept in that we can't tie a permit to an applicant. I think the risk of not testing this is greater than I can't see the risk that other people will see. I only see an opportunity to be able to have a win-win, a win for the applicant whose fly-in, fly-in worker wants to spend some time with his 6-year-old child. He can't get a job in Hobart. He hopes to get a job in Hobart. So 2 years he may get a job in Hobart and be back in Hobart and back to a full-time residence for him and his family. To ignore a human factor, I think, goes against what we're trying to do here. We've got the officers who recommended approval. We have added extra conditions to alleviate some of the concerns of the applicant, of the representatives, and also a further condition that it ties to that. So I see it's a win-win. Maybe the council in its present thing doesn't look for win-wins. I certainly look for a win-win. You can't win everything. As an individual alderman, you might sit there, but I think, please, just give some certainty to a decision, because if we lose this thing, it will look like the council cannot make a decision.
Okay,
Oh, sorry. Can I say?
No, I've summed up.
I think you missed your chance, Councillor Sherlock, I'm sorry.
I didn't realise you were summing up.
I'll put that. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no.
No.
Show of hands, all those in favour.
Alderman Zuko, Alderman Sexton, Councillor Coates, Alderman Baracus, Alderman Thomas, Alderman Briscoe.
Against?
Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutton, Councillor Sherlock, the Deputy Lord Mayor and the Lord Mayor.
It's carried, Lord Mayor, 6 votes to 5.
Okay, moving on to item 10.
Lord Mayor, this is draft local provision schedule of the Tasmanian Planning Scheme additional inclusions. I move that.
Seconded by Councillor Harvey.
Lord Mayor, this is really looking at the motion is that the council resolve that it is satisfied that the changes to the draft Hobart local provision schedule as shown in the planning agenda meets the local provision schedule, and that council endorses the changes to the draft Hobart local provision schedule for submission to the Tasmanian Planning Commission, and the council endorsed the notification of individual property owners affected by the extent of the flood-prone areas hazard code overlay when the draft Hobart local provisions schedule is exhibited. This came about because we made responses to the changes put forward by the Tasmanian Planning Commission, but there were some that hadn't been included, and they included the updated flood mapping to inform the application of the flood-prone areas hazard code, and that was looking at all our catchments, not just 2 or 3 of them, for 1 in 100-year flooding events. So that obviously affects landholders. We're also including the additional significant trees that we discussed and approved in March 2020, and also that appendage of Alexander Street in Sandy Bay to be included in the Golf Links Estate Heritage Precinct. So it's that southern side of Alexander Street, which had been, it's really annexing it, so it's back as part of the Golf Links estate, and also minor changing to a couple of properties, 24 Gregson Avenue. We did a boundary adjustment or some sort of change there, and 516 Sandy Bay Road. So statutory requirements, but also including what we have made as changes as well. So moved.
Further discussion? No discussion? Okay, put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Moving on to item 11, motion from Alderman Baracus.
Thank you, Chair. Look, Lord Mayor, this motion was actually inspired by the motion that you and Councillor Ewan moved in.
Seconded by Alderman Thomas.
I think it was the last meeting of last year. Lord Mayor, in 2019, this council unanimously voted to declare a housing crisis. Since then, minus this sort of brief, I suppose, I wouldn't know if you'd call recess from it that we had when everything quietened down because of COVID, the problem hasn't gotten better, it's actually gotten worse. So we've seen all the information that's been pouring out the last couple of weeks about those that are having huge difficulty finding or experiencing housing stress, people having huge difficulties finding houses, having access to houses that they can afford. And next to that, there's all this information coming out about the fact that we have one of the most undersupplied housing markets, I think, in the capital cities around Australia. Lord Mayor, we are looking at, this isn't an issue in which there's one silver bullet solution. There is the element of short stay accommodation, of course, which was discussed by the council last year. There's the issue of, do we need more social housing? Do we need more public housing? And I think most people would agree that, yes, we do. Those are matters ultimately and primarily for the state and federal governments. I think there's been a lot of talk since the housing crisis was declared. What should the state government be doing? What should the federal government be doing? Should they be doing more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? There hasn't been a lot of talk as to what the council should be doing. I think the council is ultimately the planning authority. We do have a planning scheme that we have to adhere to, but we are the planning authority, and that's a very significant lever that dictates what gets built, what doesn't get built, and how many new houses we will see every year. Since we declared a housing crisis, this council rejected 144 houses for various reasons, some justified, some I would say less justified, but that's my opinion. But the reality is that's 144 houses that weren't built because of the council. These decisions were ultimately made based on differing interpretations of the planning scheme. Lord Mayor, during your motion that was discussed last year, there was reference made to the University of Tasmania report. And in that report, there were a number of recommendations, and I think the first two recommendations are what inspired your motion and Councillor Ewan's motion. And upon reading that, there were a number of other recommendations that were put forward to look at whether or not the council could be implementing measures into the planning scheme to include housing supply as a planning consideration. As well as that, there were recommendations that we recommend, or that the state government make changes to the broader planning scheme, as well as calling on the Tasmanian government to establish a housing supply forecasting council so we can make decisions based on what's expected to happen in the future rather than chasing our tails, I think has been the case in the past, but I don't know if that's at anybody's fault or the fault of just the system in general. But I think we do need to be really, really proactive in looking at what we can do. We've declared a housing crisis. We need to be looking at what we can do. There are a number of ways that we could be looking at. We could be, including housing supply into the planning scheme, or through our own changes, or through the state government making broader changes. There's incentive schemes to allow greater density for developments that have a certain number of affordable houses or social housing that happens in other states. There's inclusionary zoning measures. There's a large number of things, and the intent of this motion, there's a reason why the motion isn't specific towards one particular policy, is this is a complex space, and these sort of decisions do have unintended consequences beyond what we might expect. And I think the appropriate thing is this be referred to the planning staff in the same way as the motion on short stay was hoping for a report. Lord Mayor, can I request an additional minute? I think this is an important issue.
Alderman Briscoe, seconded by Councillor Sherlock. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. There are a number of ways, but this is something that we need to get some advice from the staff. What's the best way we can go about doing this? And we might get advice back saying, look, practically this isn't an appropriate way of going about things. We need to find another way to address this issue. But I think there's been enough talk about what the state government should be doing, what the federal government should be doing, and there needs to be a bit more talk and a bit more reflection on what we should be doing. I think this is a good step in that direction. I think it would run, and I think my understanding is it would be a report in addition to the report that we have already requested in regards to short stay accommodation. And look, just lastly, I'd thank Councillor Harvey. I think his suggestion that we also invite the authors of the report to brief the council as an appropriate one. I think we could learn a lot from them and learn a lot from what they have to say. So look, I'd commend the motion. I would hope that we all support it. I think this is effectively, in addition to the motion that was moved last year, rounds out those recommendations from the university. And I think if the council investigates all of these recommendations, comes back and some of them are recommendations worth pursuing and some of them aren't, then we go from there. But at this point, it's a purely investigative exercise. It's the first step in a process that hopefully might result in some changes to how we do things on council in a way that benefits or balances our planning scheme in one that. 15 seconds. Thank you. Balances the amenity and maintaining our character of our city, as well as actually addressing the issues and addressing what is the ultimately the biggest issue our city is currently facing. So I'll commend the motion, Lord Mayor.
Alderman Coates.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Look, I'll speak very quickly. I commend Alderman Ruckus putting this up. I think I agree with him. There is an issue of housing. We all know that, and I think he's appropriately putting this forward. Look, we all know that our General Manager gives frank and fearless advice and doesn't hold back when he needs to, and I, for one, was buoyed by his comment to the report, which didn't raise any red flags with me. So, look, I'm happy to support it, and I think I'm glad to hear that the mover of this motion commended Councillor Harvey on his recommendation. I look forward to receiving that briefing, and I think this was an example of real collaboration when we discussed this in the committee, and I think we came to a really good outcome, and I'm happy to support it again in council. So I look forward to the briefing, and I look forward to ultimately this report coming back to us. Thanks.
Further discussion, Alderman Thomas.
Yes, 24 hours ago I had some concerns about using this tool as distinct from looking to what's traditionally been done in the area. So we have decades of Commonwealth state housing agreements. We have a housing agency at the present time that will probably say there isn't a problem. We have a history of everything from housing commission dwellings over the years, in some cases were able to be bought by the tenants, and there's probably no one prouder than a person who has had a housing commission home in those days and was able to pay it off and actually acquire title. It's always been a basic human right, and I think this council has well expounded on that right as a basic human right. It becomes a question, I think, of where does the responsibility come, cooperative and collegiately as it may be, of course, with a number of sources, to deal with it from time to time. Government certainly were the ascendant authority. They were the only ones providing for housing in to any great degree. And we're now talking about a situation with a number of levers and drivers. And I say that because you will remember about a year ago, Lord Mayor, we talked privately about whether or not to create an incentive scheme or a mandatory scheme. So an incentive scheme whereby if I develop this site and put my risk and my capital into this site, and you want me to provide for social housing, then what incentives might I have? And I can go back to my time working in the Brisbane City Council in the very, very early days of Sally Ann Atkinson's reign as Lord Mayor. And she expounded and developed the view of transferable development rights. So if someone left the facade, we all realise what happened to facadism after that, a facade of a property, leaving the front, similar to what we have here at the State Government building next to the new hotel. Effectively, I could potentially get some rights somewhere else in the city to develop a different height or a different intensity. So I think it's a really appropriate timing for this. I just need to be really once more, and I did expound this in the last meeting before Christmas, and It didn't go anywhere. The idea is that I love to make decisions based on facts. And the facts that I had at that time, which haven't changed, is that as a result of COVID, the tourism numbers coming into this state are going to be down to around 30% of their pre-COVID time occupancy. We have lost something like 90% of the international students, which had amounted to 13,700 prior to COVID. So that rush, that plethora of people looking for accommodation at any cost has been alleviated. So if I take those two fairly critical imposts out of the housing market, I'm left with, has the State Housing Authority, state government, done enough in this area? Have they built enough? Have they planned enough for the future? Is there an authoritative version of what the occupancy, what is the vacancy rate now, and what is the true position in respect to homelessness? And we have to deal with it, whatever it is, but no one can tell me what it actually is at the moment. Can someone tell me what is the impact of, I would like to know, as part of this report, what is the impact of every time we enter this situation? I'd love it for us to have a state government representative come and tell us. No gloss, everything in black and white, exactly what their predictions are, because, Lord Mayor, they presided over this from the moment when Tasmania started becoming the economic jewel it was before COVID. They saw this coming. They went to other agency meetings. They saw what was coming. And yet we still got ourselves into the muddle and the mess we came. So
30 seconds.
yes to the report, no problems. But please include the incentives, the levers or the drivers, the mandatory versus the voluntary scheme, because you'll get a lot more out of people who are prepared to develop their property in the event that you make it worthwhile. Because unlike some people maybe in this chamber, it's not easy to take a decision to develop a property from what it is. It's not easy. It might be easy for us to sit here and make decisions, but the risk these people take to their family, their future, their company or whatever is massive. And I think we just need to be aware of that.
Alderman Briscoe.
Thank you. Very briefly, Lord Mayor, I commend Alderman Baracus for bringing those recommendations that came from UTAS report, and also I acknowledge that really wise words from Alderman Thomas there. My view is that the state government has got an important role in association with the federal government, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, we should not be living in a bubble. We should be doing this as a Greater Hobart issue. Greater Hobart experience the same housing pressures that we are. If you drive to Kingston or Glenorchy or Clarence or even out of Brighton, there are extensive housing going up. Yet that's not considered in any of our reports. Now, the recommendations is recommendation 3 and 4. I believe that should be addressed in the state planning scheme, which hopefully is going to come within a year or so. I think if we start modifying our planning scheme and then a state planning scheme comes in, I think we will get into, it will cause a lot of difficulty. My view is that that Hobart is almost a saturation point for houses. Do we want people to live in small little one-bedroom or bedsit units in town to address the housing issue? And I'd say no. We want people to live with dignity, with space, with access to recreation, access to transport, and we may have reached the limits for unit development in Hobart. We are unique in Hobart that the majority of people live in single dwellings with gardens and space around them, access to good things. Do we really want to go to the small one-bedroom slums of the future? And I'd say, no, we don't, because the Hobart will be ruined if we do that. That's not saying there are not opportunities for multi-dwelling units in parts of Hobart, But however, if we have the push that everyone is going to be housed because they're going to be in small units, I think that's the wrong thing. It's not looking at the future. There are other ways that the government could also address more rental properties, and a suggestion came to us this today from a well-known person who has a great interest in the city. He suggested perhaps the carrot approach. If people convert their properties, which are standalone short stay accommodation, back into full-time accommodation, rental accommodation, maybe they waiver the land tax. Or we could look at a different rating system. If people do that, then maybe as a landlord, landlords may decide, well, it's far better to have it in the rental market rather than the short stay. There are other ways of doing it rather than putting a big sledgehammer. I believe that Alderman Baracus's motion builds the picture a bit more, especially motion if we can get the Tasmanian Government to establish a housing supply forecasting council which will give real data rather than the assertions of one side or the other side, or some lobby group or another lobby group, or people who hate short-term accommodation and people who like short-term accommodation. But if we have, and then blame everything on short-term accommodation, I think the Housing Supply Forecasting Council could collect real data and we would have an authoritative place to go for data. So I commend again Alderman Baracus, and hopefully some good stuff will come out of this report if it gets passed tonight.
Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Can I start by saying that I reject assertions that the council has been the problem with regard to housing. Clearly that's not the case. And the figure, I think it was 164... 44. 44 housing opportunities, or were rejected through the council. They were a couple of big projects that were recommended for refusal by council. They were high-rise developments in the wrong spot. They didn't meet the planning scheme.
There was a mix of dwellings that made up that 144, and one of them included, or a couple of them were applications that were recommended for approval, so that statement's not accurate.
The majority of them were in proposals that were recommended for refusal. But on top of this, we've also seen a huge growth in multi-residential accommodation in Hobart. And I think this is a period in history that's never been seen before, where we have experienced such growth in multi-residential proposals that have been approved. The problem we have is that they're not necessarily being built fast enough. So the number of properties, multi-residential properties, is quite clear. There's a map, I think, on the council website. The data is kept on the council website and it's fully available for everybody to see, and I'll just confirm that through you, Lord Mayor, with Mr Noy. Can you just confirm that all that data is available on the council website?
Yeah, through you, Lord Mayor, there is certainly a page that outlines the development approvals of substantial unit development that's occurred within the city.
So I contend that that's been a part of history of Hobart, that we've seen a huge growth in these multi-residential developments. And the council also has a proud history of supporting residential development in Hobart on a number of occasions where we've handed over or sold or utilised council land. And three that come to mind are the Common Ground project, the UTAS project in Elizabeth Street, and the latest one is the Goulburn Street proposal. And there's been several others that I won't mention due to other reasons, or some reasons that are a bit more sensitive, some of those projects. So we have done what we can as a council to make sure that we're addressing the problem. We've declared a housing emergency. We've created committees to help push the issue, which I can attest to Alderman Thomas's interest in. So we've done what we can. State government could do a lot more in providing the housing, and they need to find opportunities. And that was through the rail corridor, which I hoped that they would purchase a number of properties in order to build multi-residential tenancies, but it looks like they didn't take the opportunity when it arose. But anyway, we'll see where the state government goes with solving the problem. Airbnb, short stay accommodation, has been an issue, and I appreciate the report that's come from UTAS on this topic. And I also appreciate Alderman Baracus's notice of motion to try and look into different ways where we can, what levers we can pull to help facilitate housing. But I also would like to suggest, and I'll move it as an amendment, that we include all 5 recommendations from the report from the UTAS. What's the division called? The Institute for the Study of Social Change. I'd like to move an amendment that all 5 of those recommendations be included in the notice of motion. So we've got 3, and I'd like the other 2 to be looked at as well, which take a permit approach, or to look at taking a permit approach towards...
Alderman Baracus, do you want to accommodate these?
No, Lord Mayor. I think it's a bit of an exercise in redundancy, given that the motion moved by yourself and Councillor Ewan effectively addressed those recommendations. If anything, this is following up to round off the report.
Well, for me, Lord Mayor, it means that we're taking all of the recommendations. We're looking at that report holistically rather than just taking sections of it. So I hope that people will see the common sense in looking at the whole report and looking at all of the recommendations. So I'll move that as an amendment. But I will be supporting, whichever way it goes, I will support the motion tonight, because I think we need to look at those levers. But keep in mind, the UTAS report was about short stay accommodation. It wasn't about trying to change the planning scheme to benefit housing above heritage and above other considerations in the planning scheme.
Point of order.
Alderman Baracus.
Lord Mayor, there's been no suggestion that housing should be benefited or developers should be benefited. It's about finding a balance between heritage and amenity and good planning outcomes and things like housing. I think to assert that we talk about benefiting one over the others.
Alderman Baracus, you will have a chance to sum up right at the end, and you can address all your points then. Alderman Zucker, did you want to speak to the amendment or the substantive motion? Because I'm inclined to just try and get the amendment.
Lord Mayor, I want to get rid of both at the same time, so I'll just speak once, and that way I don't have to speak again. Lord Mayor, I wasn't going to get up and speak, but the amendment has actually brought me to my feet. Especially some of the comments made by Alderman Harvey that the state government should do more. State government can only do so much. Councils can do more. And, making the point that, we've got so many multi-development approvals at the moment. Is that the good work of the council, or is that the mere factor that the property market in Hobart is the most buoyant in the country and developers want to make money on development?
Point of clarification.
Sorry?
Point of order.
Point of clarification.
I was referring to the fact that it was asserted that we were the problem, when I'm saying that we have been processing those development applications.
Look, I got that. I understand that. But the whole thing about it is the only reason why we've got all these multi-developments happening is because we are the hottest market in the country. And also, we've done plenty. We've created committees. Wow. I remember being part of a housing summit 2 years ago, and a housing summit 2 years before that, and a housing summit 2 years before that. We keep on setting up these committees rather than being proactive. One of the reasons why I won't support any filtration of this motion, because we have got the Airbnb one happening, is because every time there's a filtration, something's left out. And I'll give you the explanation, and Mr Noy will ratify this in a minute, and maybe the General Manager. A number of years ago, I put forward a notice of motion to increase density, to work on a plan so we can have developers provide extra bonus ratios so that they have housing and apartments on the rental market for a period of time. So we contacted the state government to have that, and to also give them bonus densities. And as I explained at the time, at the moment on a 1,000 square metre block we can only build 3 apartments. But imagine if a developer, a small developer, could build 5, And out of those 5, as I said at the time, 2 of them, one is on the affordable market and the other one's on the rental market for 10 years. That creates, they're the bonuses that we need to be doing. And we can be doing that for small, medium and large. What actually happened to that notice of motion is it got gobbled up into a series of other reports and nothing ever transpired about it. And I did ask Mr. Noy about it, and he said, oh, that ended up in that report because it was added to it and added to it and added to it. But have we done anything about it? No. The 3 very things that could have assisted the housing market, the rental market, the housing market, and that got gobbled up into another report. So I'm not going to support anything that dilutes the intent of what this motion is all about. Now, I believe that the motion that was put forward by the Lord Mayor and Councillor Ewan has dealt with that. This is going to deal with another thing. I do hope I will just so that we get it back on the agenda, and I've already flagged it to Mr. Noy that I'm going to put that notice of motion back up because it's got lost. It's gone AWOL. And there were 3 things that we could have done to help the housing market right across the board from small, medium and large developers. Because as I said to you, if we've got a developer who's developing, let's hypothetically say 50 units, but the developer can develop 60, but out of those extra 10, there's a percentage that stay on the rental market and a percentage that are sold on the affordable market. Everyone's a winner. The city's a winner, the developer's a winner, and everybody. The same as I said with the 1,000 square metre scenario. So look, I fully support this. I won't support the notice of motion, the amendment. But I'll say this: it's not just the government that's got to deliver. It's got to be all of us delivering. It's got to be the council that's going to send out a message that it will approve smaller apartments for singles, and will look at development in a slightly larger scale so that we have more housing on the market.
Further discussion? Councillor Sherlock?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Look, I think on this occasion I actually do agree with Alderman Zuko when he said that it's about all of us delivering something. It's about us all delivering solutions. And in that same way, it's also...
Point of order, Lord Mayor. Alderman Zuko is making references or inferences that he's
I'm just feeling hot.
That's being disingenuous.
I'm not a monkey, I'm just feeling hot.
Okay. Look, if everyone can just quietly and respectfully listen to Councillor Sherlock's intervention. Councillor Sherlock, would you like to continue, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lord Mayor.
Jovial.
Sorry, was I interrupted again?
No, I'm sorry. I apologise for that, Lord Mayor. I'm just saying, be a bit jovial sometimes, will you?
Thank you.
And I'm not referring to you.
I accept your apology.
Thank you.
Councillor Sherlock. Yes, let's continue, Councillor Sherlock.
Yeah, so I will continue, and I think it is about all of us actually having, a collaborative approach of dealing with this issue together as much as we can. I do also agree with what Councillor Harvey was saying, that the UTAS report was about short stay accommodation. I think we should be mindful of that. And coming back to one of the points that Alderman Baracus raised with regards to the 144 developments, I think we also have to be mindful when we just throw out numbers. We've got to back them up with the specifics of what those numbers actually meant. And I'm very particular about that. I don't just want to throw a statistic and then let people assume or be misled as to what that 144 actually constituted. So I think we have to understand that some of that 144 did contain developments that were actually outside of the limits of the height limits, the bulk. There was a lot of reasons why they were refused. And in fact, we had over, 400 residential developments that were actually approved by this council. That's a far greater number than 144. So I think we have to be mindful of these different kinds of facts that are at play. We have to be very mindful of the fact of how we don't mislead the community. We have to be very mindful of what facts actually apply by giving a holistic view of what those numbers actually mean and what they represent. And I do commend Alderman Baracus on this particular motion. I'm not. I don't disagree with it at all. I do support the premise of it, and I do also, to my understanding, what Councillor Harvey and Councillor Briscoe also said, that the state government can actually do more. But again, as has been pointed out already, we can all do a little bit more, and I think perhaps this may be going towards that. And the added recommendation that we should have UTAS come and talk to us about that particular report, I think is really great as well. Thank you very much.
Deputy Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Firstly, a question through you to Mr Noy. Mr Noy, we had a report previously, and there were a certain number of houses or residences that could be built between here and Burnett Street effectively. Can you remember what that number was in relation to possible residential apartments or dwellings?
Through you, Lord Mayor. Look, I can't recall the actual number that was, I think, in the speculate exercise that was done with the University of Tasmania, but I can indicate that we have been doing some potential floor area capacity within that area, and that would indicate that we could fit in the order of another 4,000 dwellings within that area, within the CBD.
And according to our current planning scheme provisions? According
to our current planning scheme.
And just another question to Mr Noy. So just in relation to the inner city precinct planning that we're doing, is any of that reflected, or any of the work reflecting on how much residential amenity or how many residences might be built within the inner city?
Yes, certainly those figures that I suggested just before, around that 4,000 figure, is based on that work that we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Lord Mayor, I think it's quite clear that there is the potential to have a number of dwellings, a large number of dwellings built. So I think it was Alderman Baracus who suggested that perhaps, it might have been Alderman Briscoe, that we'd reached our limits as to how much we could possibly build in the city. And I think the information from Mr Noy is certainly quite different from that assertion. And just to go, and it has been mentioned by Councillor Sherlock as well, there was a suggestion that it was disingenuous to think that 150 residential developments weren't approved by this council, when in fact there have been over 400, closer to 420 approved by council, which adds to the housing stock. It's development approvals, not necessarily built as yet, but it is really important that we do get those facts straight. It's also really a little bit concerning to hear Alderman Zuko's comments about setting up a committee and saying, wow, we've set up a committee, as if to say we've set up another committee. The committee that we have, and Alderman Thomas is involved with it, Councillor Ewan is very much involved with it. I think even Alderman Baracus might be involved with it as well, and you, Lord Mayor, with your stewardship, is about lived experience. And the important thing about that committee is that it has people with lived experience of housing issues and homelessness. So I'm somewhat dismayed by such a comment, such a dismissive comment.
Point of clarification, Lord Mayor.
In relation to that.
Point of clarification. My reference to committee was, and if it was taken in context, 2 years ago, we had a housing summit. We had one 2 years before that, and we had one 2 years before that. The point I was making reference to on committees, sometimes committees end up talk fest, not action. That is my reference.
Alderman Zuko.
I don't
Hope it's
understand
clarified.
I
Thank
don't-
you. I'm glad you got it now.
Excuse me, Alderman Zuko.
Oh, sorry, I was just making sure it's
No,
clarified.
that's enough.
I don't think it was clarified because you were talking about committees, and it certainly sounded like the lived experience committee was.
Matter of opinion.
Can we just continue with the intervention and not the back and forth, please?
Thank you. Lord Mayor, the motion that was put, or the notice of motion put by Alderman baracus has certainly been improved by the addition that we do bring the authors of the UTAS report to talk to us, because to hear what their intention is would be good, because my reading of that report really spells out that the recommendations 1 and 2 are probably the best recommendations of that report. The others, recommendation 5 is in relation to getting adequate data collection. Well, that's a good thing too. And the other things for our council to look at as an individual council, I think puts a significant impost onto the planning staff in relation to doing this digging around to come up with further changes to the planning scheme or recommendations to the planning scheme. Surely, and I might ask this through you to Mr Noy again, Mr Noy, is the planning unit of the state government the most likely or most suitable to do this sort of high-level look at what recommendation 3 and 4 is suggesting, so changes to the planning scheme?
Through you, Lord Mayor, they would certainly have a statewide perspective on those matters. Having said that, of course, I would back my officers to provide suitable qualified advice if requested.
And just while you're there, Mr Noy, how much time do you think the officers would be spending on such a report?
Look, it would be, I suggest 5 to 10 days to put the report
Working
together.
days?
Yeah, to do the research.
Okay.
Yeah.
As chair of planning and knowing what sort of workload there is for planning staff amidst all these other requests that we get, I'm just even with the questions. Yes. Even with the interruption.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I feel that this is an impost on the staff to do, and I feel that really with the amendment from Councillor Harvey, yes, it's improved, but these recommendations are probably the least of least value in this report. So I'd be really interested to hear the authors of the report and what they have to say in relation to this.
Further discussion. Councillor Dutta.
Lord Mayor, thank you. I just want to make 3 very simple points. We have debated this quite in length at the city planning meeting, and it was a unanimous decision to support this, and I will support this motion. Point number 2, I also want to support very wholeheartedly the foreshadowed motion. I think that will give us a holistic approach to the recommendations that's there. And not to include that would be a remiss, I think, unfortunately. And the 3rd point I want to make here is this, that I want to recognize and note the presence of Chris Meridew and the email that he has written. And I think he has made some good points. I want to note that. Thank you.
Further discussion? You'll get to sum up.
Am I allowed to speak to the amendment?
If you'd like to sum up.
I can speak to the amendment again.
We're speaking to the amendment, not the substantive. Yeah. Thank you, Lord Mayor. Look, there's a bit to touch on there, and I won't touch on some of the comments made in regards to the broader motion. I'll address them in my summary. Look, I think there's been the suggestion. I'm not sure if it was made directly tonight, but it was definitely made in committee that this was effectively cherry picking recommendations from the report. I think actually I would suggest that the opposite is true. I think while and there was a reason, I think when this motion came up, or when the short stay motion that was put by yourself and Councillor Ewan came up last year, I was tempted to put that forward as an amendment to round the recommendations out. But I think in all fairness, I think that your motion was intended to address short stay accommodation specifically. I think this is intended to address another issue, and it would have been detrimental not just to your motion, but as well to what this motion is trying to intend to squeeze one on top of the other. I think rather than cherry picking, I think if anything, this motion is picking up the cherries that are left on the tree after the motion that was moved last year. I think to add this onto this motion as a as an amendment, I think detracts from the intent of the motion. I think what Councillor Harvey is attempting to cover with his amendments are already being addressed in the motion that was approved by Council last year. And to go even further, I'll just read out verbatim the bottom of the report where it says the General Manager reports a response to this. The General Manager reports a response to the motion passed on the 17th of December 2020 Short Stay Accommodation Planning Directive, and this motion, if passed, would be combined in any report back to Council. Effectively, this motion, if it's passed without amendments, will round out those recommendations. I'll also note, and I do think it is. I will note. Look, I think it's interesting that there's. Talks of the cost, and look, there's absolutely nothing wrong with Council talking about costs of investigating reports and the cost of doing things. But it is interesting that these concerns about officer time and costs of reports wasn't raised last year when the short stay motion was being discussed. So look, there's a lot more to address. But I think that's more relevant to the substantial motion rather than the amendment. I'd be encouraging everybody not to support the amendment. I think it does detract from the intent of the motion, and I think the issues that have been suggested by Councillor Harvey are already being covered in the motion that was moved last year. I think it's redundant, and I don't think any of the possible solutions that we'll be receiving would be any worse off for us not having this amendment, because it is already being covered in the motion that was passed on the 17th of December. So I'd urge everybody not to support it. We have one motion in regards to short stay accommodation, and this is a motion that's specific in regards to housing supply. So I'd encourage it to remain that way.
No one else would like to speak. I'll say a few words before I'll ask Alderman Baracus to sum up. Was there someone else?
Sorry. We'll do the amendment first.
We will, but
I should sum up the amendment if I choose.
Sum up the amendment.
No, I'll speak on both, and then we'll vote on the amendment, and then we'll sum up. Okay.
Dead in writing? No.
All right. So look, before I start my comments, can I just ask a couple of questions? The discussion's been interesting, but I think we're all putting in quite a lot of ideas, including some of Alderman Thomas's good ideas about things that are outside what I see this motion as being, but I do see them as central to the housing and homelessness policy housing and homelessness strategy. And I've been on this council now since 2016, and I think we've talked a lot about housing and homelessness and a range of policy ideas, but can I get a status report on where we're up to with what was meant to be an updated housing and homelessness strategy? Because as I understand it, that was to include some elements of planning mechanisms that we might use on supply. And it was going to be a collaboration between, I think, Mr Short's department and Mr Noy's department. Can I get a status report on where we're up to?
Lord Mayor, yes. Our plan is to hold a workshop with elected members in March with an aim to have a completed strategy for the council by June.
Okay, and can I just clarify while you're there, Mr Short, will that include ideas on planning tools that we've previously considered, things like and are common in other states, things like inclusionary zoning and those sort of elements?
Yes, it will, Lord Mayor.
Okay, lovely. Because I think the other thing I just wanted to ask before I talk further is just around some of the numbers that have been thrown around in the sort of publicity about this motion, and what the council has or hasn't approved since we declared a housing crisis. Can the director just clarify for me exactly what date was that, or roundabout was that crisis declaration, and how many residential units, dwellings, apartments we've approved since the housing crisis?
Lord Mayor, the declaration was made, as I understand it, on the 3rd of June 2019, and we've approved 612 dwellings since that date.
Okay, so yeah, I think, as I said, there's been quite a bit of posturing about the sort of glass half empty approach to development approvals. But if you look at this more from a glass half full, you'd say that there's been a very significant number of dwellings approved, I think over 640 something in that 2 years, which is a lot of approvals, and as Councillor Harvey has pointed out, probably record levels of inner city apartment approvals just in the last 12 months, more than this council's ever seen. You can sort of focus on the negative, but you can also focus on actually what has been approved, and I think the record of the council is very strong, and I think it's important to not always focus on the negative. The other thing I just wanted to pick up on from Alderman Baracus's intervention was saying that not a lot of work has been done by the council since the declaration of that crisis, and apart from all the dwelling approvals, potentially record levels in the inner city apartments, the alliance that was formed by the council at the time when this was, our declaration was a significant bit of media, and that media did add to the lobbying momentum that did lead to a $150 million housing debt to be waived, which is being invested in social housing. The work of the council also led to our first ever safe night space being set up through, and the Salvation Army and Housing City Mission have said that without the council taking a strong interest, that wouldn't have happened. And that's a really unique and a service that's never been provided before for people experiencing homelessness. We've also done a lot of motions, and Alderman Zuko talked about some of his ones that he's done over the years. I've also asked for investigations into inclusionary zoning. We've asked for various revamped housing policies. We've really dig deep into some of these issues. We're developing a inner cities precinct plan, and one of the main purposes of that is to work out how do we actually build the density in the city and ensure we've got the infrastructure to provide that quality of life that you need if you're increasing density. Alderman Briscoe's right that you can't just have density increasing throughout the city or in the inner city area without corresponding infrastructure and community facilities, parks and sporting facilities and schools. So that's one of the reasons we're doing the inner city precinct plan. So this council's doing a lot and has done a lot, both in approvals and a whole range of other policies. So I think that's really important to put on the record. The other thing I just want to quickly say is that a lot of the suggestion about this motion is that is really, I think, better suited to the listed statutory planning process, which I think is what Alderman Baracus is suggesting, but more to the strategic planning process. And, in terms of working out how much housing we need, how much the population's going to be growing, where the infrastructure is needed, that's all strategic planning, not statutory planning. By the time you get to statutory planning, it's almost a bit late. You're not really thinking and being proactive about housing supply and where it should go and the infrastructure to match it. And, we have to do more strategic planning in this city, but particularly we have to do more strategic planning in this state. And I will speak about the state government because I am incredibly worried about the lack of a planning department in this state. We are the only state in Australia that has no state planning department. That is absurd in the context of a state that's growing. We're also the only state in the country that doesn't have a state architect, and it's a state architect that would be producing things like these housing supply forecasts like they do in New South Wales and Victoria and everywhere else they have a planning department. So, you know, yes, let's do the work. I'm supportive of the motion, but I just want us to, I guess, be level-headed about what we can do and where we can intervene and where we can have most impact. Through the intervention of the 4 councils in this Greater Hobart, we are doing a metro plan. We're the ones doing the bulk of the work there. The state government's only putting in $50,000 into the Greater Hobart Metro Plan, but that will look at housing supply, where growth can happen, what infrastructure we need, all those sort of things. So, you know, we're doing the heavy lifting in council. This report will probably reflect some of that, but I just wanted to put a few things on the record. Thank you. So now, we're going to vote on the amendment by Councillor Harvey. All those in favour of the amendment, say aye. Against, say no.
Aye.
Show of hands, all those in favour.
Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Sherlock, the Deputy Lord Mayor.
All those against.
Alderman Zuko, Alderman Sexton, Councillor Coates, Alderman Baracus, Alderman Thomas, Alderman Briscoe, and the Lord Mayor.
So it's lost, Lord Mayor.
The number.
4-4, 7 against.
Alderman Baracus, would you like to sum up on the substantive motion?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I suppose we'll start from the top, but Alderman Briscoe made some very correct points about this, you know, potentially being, you know, is this a matter for Hobart Council specifically, or is it a greater Hobart issue, or is it something that needs to be brought into the planning scheme broadly? I think there was as well a lot of suggestions about, do we want to do inclusionary zoning, do we want to do this sort of policy? You know, I think as well we can also add, and I know Alderman Zuko's been a champion of this for a number of years, about maybe we should be putting in measures to encourage or make it easier to get the shop tops developed in the middle of the city, and that's a large number of housing. The motion was worded to not try and add any specificity from our perspective as to what should be done. That is something that should be dealt with, or should be given after advice from the staff, from the planning officers. You know, perhaps there's certain aspects of the planning issue, the planning scheme, or the certain aspects of the planning in general that are specifically relevant to the capital city and the sort of demands and issues. And as well as that, it's all of Southern Tasmania or Greater Hobart that's facing this issue, and perhaps it's more appropriate for certain things to be done in the broader planning scheme. Perhaps a hybrid measure is appropriate, and we can do some LPSs and make some specific changes to our area as we do. But again, this is something that I think we should be talking about post a report, not pre a report, because we can get too tangled up in the weeds before we've actually gotten any advice about what the best way of going about this is. Look, I think, and you know, as Alderman Zuko said, there's been a lot of talk fests, and I think it was Councillor Ewan during the summit who I think prophetically said that, you know, all these summits are great and hopefully they might lead to some responses, but she's, you know, hopefully this doesn't turn into another talk fest. And I think, you know, the committees are good, the summit's good. I think if we can sit down and talk about the issue, we can sit there and, as the Deputy Lord Mayor said, have these committees where we're talking to people with lived experiences, the same committee that Alderman Thomas and Councillor Ewan are so heavily involved with, as well as myself and Councillor Dutta. We can help, you know, disseminate some of that information and help figure out what the particularities of the issues are and how we can address that for those that are experiencing that. But out of all those summits and out of all these talks and these action plans and these committees, there does have to be a point where action's actually made, and there hasn't been a lot of that. I know there was the reference to, I mean, us declaring...
30 seconds.
I might ask for another minute, Lord Mayor.
Moved by Councillor Sherlock, seconded by Alderman Briscoe. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried unanimously.
Thank you. us declaring the housing emergency helped put pressure on the on the federal government to waive the debt. Ultimately, that was the federal government doing that. We need to focus as well on what our role is, and I think we need to be careful not to too aggressively outsource our responsibility in this space. I know there was the point about we've rejected 144 houses, but we've approved 612 in the same period. And look, I'd caution everybody. That's 23.5%. That's almost a quarter of rejections compared to approvals. That's not a great statistic. If we'd approved that, it would be closer to 756. And I'd say, with the exception of 2020, and that was an exceptional year, not in a good way. Every single year from 2017, 2018, 2019, the number of houses that get built in Hobart are very much less than the population increase of Hobart.
Point of order, Lord Mayor. This is new information. It's not summing up.
That's not new information. Those numbers were the ones that were provided by other elected members.
I think it's around the. Were you talking about something else?
It's new information.
Oh, which one? Sorry.
In relation to the year by year account of housing.
Just use the word previous year.
All right.
Look, I think
15 seconds now.
We can all continue to pat ourselves on the back and talk about what a great job we've done, or we can actually try and do something, because clearly what we've been doing up until now isn't solving the problem. So perhaps we can do more.
Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no.
No.
Show of hands. All those in favour.
Alderman Zuko, Alderman Sexton, Councillor Harvey, Councillor Dutton, Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Coates, Alderman Baracus, Alderman Thomas, Alderman Briscoe, and the Lord Mayor.
Against.
Deputy Lord Mayor.
Carried, Lord Mayor, 10 votes to 1.
And so we're now closing.
Move that we close the meeting, Lord Mayor.
Seconded by Alderman Briscoe. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried unanimously.